Hello and welcome to the first of our transfer deadline day streams. Firstly, we're starting off in the Northwest and the Midlands. We'll be looking at both Manchester clubs, both Liverpool clubs, and all four clubs in the West Midlands as well. Michael will be joined with Charlie in a moment as well. But firstly, how are you two?
Yeah, okay at the moment. Yeah, we'll see as we get closer to 11 o'clock. But
has it been busy yet for any of you or not?
Not quite yet, no. Arne Slot had a press conference earlier, so I've been there. It looks like it might be a quiet one at Liverpool, but Everton could be a little bit more interesting.
Very much so. Right. Will, we'll start with you, of course. I know it's not coming today, but of course, Liverpool did sign Federico Chiesa yesterday. You've been to Arne Slot's press conference this morning. What was the chat about that?
Yeah, it was interesting to speak to him about Chiesa. Obviously, Liverpool's business for a lot of the summer was slow, to say the least. There's a lot of clamour for getting players in, but Arne Slot's coming in replacing Jurgen Klopp and a lot of players away at the Copa America and Euros. He wants to have a good look at the squad first, and I think the new sporting director Rich Hughes said it was all be a late crescendo for Liverpool, and that's what happens. Obviously, they brought Matej Shevli, how I pronounced the Valencia goalkeeper, in, and as you say, Federico Chiesa in yesterday from Juventus. He's arrived. The interesting one was about his injuries, because I think that's been a big one for Liverpool fans. There's been maybe a bit of a slight on Chiesa, saying that he's injury prone, but Arne Slot sort of dispelled those worries, saying that he had one serious ACL injury a couple of years ago, and he's had a few niggling injuries, but apart from that, he's fine. Arrives a little bit short of match sharpness. He's going to train today, but it's probably not going to be in the squad for Sunday. So Liverpool got to work him up towards match speed, but they've got a week and a bit to do that now with the international break. So that's good for Liverpool. So yeah, I mean, maybe it's not the sign that everybody wanted, but it certainly improves Liverpool's options in the forward line.
Very much so, yes. I mean, I looked at the price of that one and I thought that is relatively cheap. And do you think that's because Juventus didn't really want him? And also, I know you mentioned the injuries. Do you think that was actually a factor, despite the fact that Slot's tried to dismiss it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, a few years ago when Liverpool were linked with him, he was quoted as 100 million euros or pounds, whichever one it was. And obviously his price has dropped significantly from then after the injury, and he's not in Thiago Motta's plans at Juventus. It looks like there's been a little bit of an overhaul there, and he wants to put his own stamp on things. He's been frozen out a little bit, only has a year left on his deal, so maybe Juventus didn't want to risk losing him for free next summer. They're happy to cash in. So look, if Liverpool can fulfil his potential that he showed earlier in his career, then it's an absolute bargain, and I know he provides covering competition. Maybe Liverpool haven't had enough of that, particularly for Mo Salah over the years. So if maybe he can be an understudy to Mo Salah and help out in other positions, then it can only be a good thing.
No, I fully agree. Yes, I think it's, despite the price, maybe a shrewd bit of business. And even if he's not constantly available for the times he is, he may well help Liverpool pick up some points. Michael, I'll come to you, and I'm going to start with Jadon Sancho. What's the situation? Because he seems to be, no one really knows where he's going to end up.
Yeah, it's a funny situation, isn't it? Because obviously he was frozen out of the squad last year by Erik ten Hag, was reintegrated this summer. I think there was always a thought that if the possibility of moving him on came up, it was something that United would like to do, despite him being, as I say, reintegrated. Juventus were very keen on him. PSG were keen on him this summer. But according to kind of the latest reports today, it looks more like Chelsea. Now, who knows with Chelsea? That can change by the hour, so we're not totally sure. I don't really maybe see the logic in there's no room for Raheem Sterling, but we can find a spot for Jadon Sancho in the squad. It doesn't really make much sense to me, but a move to Chelsea would certainly keep Manchester United happy. I think they're definitely keen to move Sancho on, regardless of Ten Hag, I don't think the club were particularly impressed with that situation last year with Sancho publicly coming out and speaking out against the manager. So I think they'll hope that one can be sorted today. United, there was a little bit of interest in Raheem Sterling earlier this week. Always looked unlikely, but latest reports kind of coming out today saying Arsenal looks more likely. So at this stage, in terms of new names cropping up for United, it looks pretty quiet. But we are, of course, expecting the imminent announcement of Ugarte. He's been in England for kind of over 48 hours now, coming in from PSG, obviously to bolster Manchester United's midfield options. McTominay leaving the club, so there'll be plenty of news at United today anyway, on the final day of the market as well. They've also got the Europa League draw, which is, I mean, who doesn't want extra things happening on transfer deadline day? I mean, it's fantastic. So yeah, we've got that to contend with as well.
Indeed, you do. Yes. On Scott McTominay, that's an interesting one. Obviously, going off to play in Italy. What will Man United actually miss from his departure?
I think they'll miss his tenacity, his work rate. I think there's been plenty of players over the years you can level at United. Have they really given their all when they're playing? I don't think Scott McTominay is one of those. He's always given 100% when he's been out in the pitch. I think they'll obviously miss that bond of a youth team player coming through. I mean, there's not many clubs that see that as a priority more than Manchester United and value that more than United. They'll miss that. But I think, truthfully, in terms of playing ability, I think probably it's the time for him to move on. I always felt with McTominay that he's a player that's never been properly utilised by United, be it as a holding midfielder. I don't think that's a role that he plays. I mean, Jose Mourinho used him as a bit of a pawn sometimes in his various wars with the club, and I mean, Eric Ten Hag has never got his midfield balance right. So I always felt a little bit sorry for him, but I think that in terms of technical ability, I don't think he's ever going to be a player that are going to fire Manchester United towards a Premier League title. I think that a move now suits everyone, particularly United as well, moving on an academy project, which means that it counts really favourably in the PSR numbers as well. So it's a shame for United and I suppose for the player, but I think it probably works out in everyone's best interest in the long term.
Yes, indeed. Well, speaking of PSR, I'm going to come back to you, Will, because of course that's been a subject that Everton have, let's be honest, hated over the last 12 months or so. But you mentioned at the start that it could be perhaps a busier day at Goodison Park. So what's the situation?
Yeah, well, obviously Neil Maupay has completed his departure to Marseille.
With an interesting Twitter post as well, to say
one final way to rile the fans. I don't think there'll be any disappointed toffees seeing him depart. 1 goal in 32 games. It's been a little bit of a disaster, to be quite frank, his time at Goodison. But yeah, as you say, Orel Mangala is on his way. He flew over last night. He's having his medical today. Sean Dyche confirms his press conference yesterday that Everton are looking to bring him in midfield. I think probably a sensible deal. Everton are a little bit light in the middle of the park. Let Amadou Onana leave to go to Aston Villa and released Andre Gomez and only brought in Tim Irabunam, who's really impressed, actually, surpassed expectations already, but still a body short in there. So he's coming in, and now you're looking at, are there going to be more sales? The one that you're looking at is Dominic Calvert-Lewin, to be quite frank, into the final year of his deal. Hasn't signed a new contract at Everton, almost joined Newcastle early in the summer. Are there any suitors out there? What happens with him to Everton? I think if Everton have a bid offered, they're going to have to look at it. And Sean Dyche said the club will look at it. And if it meets the valuation, they'll let Dominic Calvert-Lewin go rather than let him go for free next summer. Mason Holgate's another one potentially who could be offloaded. But as you say, incomings, it might be dictated by whether Dominic Calvert-Lewin does depart. They'll need a striker. Supporters would like another winger with pace. But it's whether they can get them deals over the line. But I think there might be a couple of deals that go late in the day.
I think of all the ones, all the departures you've mentioned there, Onana's probably the biggest, of course. A good fee for him, but they're going to miss quite a good player there, aren't they, in the middle of the park?
Yeah, it's a funny one with Onana because he has so much ability and you could see it. But it was in glimpses. He wasn't consistent enough. Maybe that he was a victim of Sean Dyche's system. towards the end of last season, he wasn't in the starting 11, to be honest with you. So the director of football, Kevin Fell, will come out the last home game last season, said we're going to have to make sales. Drew a line on, the line in the sand and what needs to happen. And I think everyone looks at it and think, well, if you're going to get rid of some of the assets, Onana's probably the one you would allow to leave, and then Calvert-Lewin managed to keep Jared Branthwaite and Jordan Pickford, who the two that every supporter would want to keep. So I think it suits all parties. I can see Onana going on having a really good career, to be honest with you, under Unai Emery, but he just, haven't made good profits on him. And was he a Sean Dyche player? I don't think he was. And look, Everton's main goal is to survive the season, get into the new stadium as a Premier League club. So you've got to be pragmatic about it. And that means losing one of the better players who might go on and have a good career. Then you just got to bite the bullet on that one.
No, I think you're right. Yes, I mean, obviously the transfer fee they've got is a good one, so that will help in terms of PSR concerns. Charlie, how are you on this transfer deadline day?
I'm good, Danny. How are you doing? It's been a busy one so far, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you've just been telling me about a Birmingham loan deal that's happened there. But that aside, how do you think the day is going to be looking for all four of the West Midlands clubs?
I think the main one, Aston Villa, it's going to be quite a quiet day in terms of incomings. They wanted to sign a centre-back or a right-back or someone who can play both after the injury for Matty Cash. But Gertruida, the Dutch international, seems to be going to RB Leipzig now, and he was a player that Villa were interested in signing. Diego Carlos, there was thoughts that he might be leaving earlier in the transfer window, but now it looks like he's going to stay. So they're not... The depth isn't as poor as they were fearing it could be. But in that right-back position with Matty Cash out for a month, they'll be relying on Kostad Nedeljkovic, who's an 18-year-old who's only played 2 or 3 Premier League matches in his career. He's not someone they can really rely on. He's shown good signs of talent, but I'm not sure he's quite the man for them. But Emery wants to start Ezri Konsa at centre-back, and so he's determined to play a right-back in the right-back position. Could they sign someone before the deadline? I mean, I'm not going to rule it out, but it does seem very unlikely at the moment. For Birmingham, Jay Stansfield is the big news, the Fulham striker. A £10 million bid is the rumour, £9 to £10 million. It's been rejected already, but talks are ongoing for that one to potentially be done before the end of the window. They're the main kind of headlines from the Midlands at the moment.
Stansfield's interesting because, of course, having spent last season at Birmingham on loan, he's then played for Fulham in midweek and scored against them in the League Cup. Then, could be heading back there again. You mentioned Aston Villa there, and obviously the injury to Matty Cash and not perhaps having the depth that they'd want at this stage. Reminds me a bit of Newcastle last year when they went to the Champions League and, the injury started to happen and then the depth gets a little bit questioned. Do you think if things go that way, would Aston Villa be in a bit of a tricky spot just like Newcastle were last season?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And they've not had the money that they wanted to spend this summer. They've had to let some key players go because of that whole profit and sustainability regulations issue that so many clubs have been having. In an ideal scenario, they'd have £50 million they can go and splash on a centre-back or a right-back to sort that issue, but they can't do it. It's the simple reality of it. So, yeah, they might struggle in terms of depth this year, especially with so many games being played in the Champions League. Extra fixtures in the new format as well, we can't forget, which is going to be even more testing than last year in the Conference League and the test that you saw for Newcastle in the Champions League. It's going to be even tougher now. They really do need to push for someone in that position today, but it's going to be difficult. They're not going to just sign anyone for the sake of it, and their budget is limited, as I mentioned.
And just before I come back to Michael, we'll take a brief look at Wolves as well. Gary O'Neill, I feel like he does an underrated job at Wolves, but again, anything expected today?
Well, the Sam Johnson deal has been confirmed, £10 million from Crystal Palace. I thought it might be a replacement for Jose Sarr, that we might see him leave today. But the sporting director, Matt Hobbs, says it's going to be a competition between the two of them, which is an interesting point. I didn't think Sam Johnson would leave Palace to become a backup. So surely he'd have some sort of assurances on starts, but they're going to be competing for that number one spot. They want to sign a centre-back as well, but Nayef Aguerd, the West Ham centre-back, has turned them down over a loan move. Lots of other players under consideration as well. Be interesting to keep that one on tab. So Trevor Chalobah from Chelsea is one to potentially keep an eye on. The Guardian saying he's 50-50 to leave Chelsea today, and Wolves are definitely interested in him. So we'll see if there's any movement there.
Very interesting, yeah. Right, Mike, I'll come back to you and to Manchester City, who always seem to get their business done relatively early, I think. Very shrewd, very efficient. So I presume a relatively quiet day at the Etihad?
It's been a relatively quiet window in general for City. There really haven't been many major incomings or outgoings. Obviously, the big one, I suppose, is Julian Alvarez moving on from City perspective, which, I think the one concern at the end of this transfer window for City is that they really are light on bodies up front. Erling Haaland is the only recognised centre-forward in the squad. He has suffered from injuries over the last couple of years. Even if he did say at the start of this season, he's never felt better. And if he is injured, then there's no real backup for him. I mean, City would say that they can kind of flip to a false nine system, but I wonder how easy it is when you've got a system that's engineered about making the most of one attacker in Haaland to suddenly switch to a system that is utilising completely different players in a different manner. I don't know how easy that is. So I suppose that's the one concern of the window. But I mean, Alvarez has moved on, João Cancelo's moved on, Sergio Gomez has left as well. That's it really in terms of first team players. I mean, Calvin Phillips has left on loan again, but he wasn't involved in the squad last season. I suppose nor was Cancelo. And then, of course, they brought in Ilkay Gundogan, which was the big story of the window for City. Even that was a pretty, I was going to say boring transfer. It's not really, but it's so sensible. It's almost it's not that big name that no one knows of, or wondering how he's going to adapt or where he's going to fit into the team. We know exactly what Ilkay Gundogan's going to bring. And then, of course, Savinho, who has started this season brilliantly, played in all 3 games so far this campaign. I think it's been a fantastic addition to the squad from the early indications anyway. Against Ipswich, I thought at the weekend he was brilliant cutting inside, and City have added a couple of extra bodies to their team. Of course, it's going to be needed in this mega season for City. They've got the extra Champions League games. They've got the Club World Cup in, I think it's June, July next year. So it's just I think this season could be 48 weeks for Man City in total. So they really are going to need to make sure they avoid injuries. But I think overall, a positive window for City if there is just that concern up front about the number of bodies they have.
Yes, I mean, obviously, it is a good move bringing back Ilkay Gundogan, especially given what he'd done at the club. Essentially, it's 1 year away, and then you bring him back for next to nothing. It's pretty good business. Not great business for Barcelona, I must say, but still. Anyway, right, before we end, I'm going to ask you to rate each of the clubs that you cover's windows. So I'll start again with you, Michael. So if you give your thoughts on Manchester United and Manchester City's windows, and perhaps give them a rating out of 10.
7 for Man United. I think they've got the age of the squad down. They've brought in more options. If maybe the first team, I don't think the first 11 doesn't maybe look any stronger. City, 8. That concern about strikers maybe just stopping them getting slightly higher marks in my eyes.
Fair play, yes. As I say, I expected nothing less from Manchester City, to be honest. I'll come to you next. Start with Liverpool, then go to Everton.
Yeah, Liverpool's a funny one. I think they've actually sold quite well, to be honest, like they always do. Got good fees for Fabio Carvalho and Seth Vandenberg to Brentford, Bobby Clark, £10 million to Red Bull. Salzburg, in terms of incomings, they haven't got that number 6 in, have they? That supporters have really clamoured for. Martin Supermendi fell away, and maybe a centre-back. Would you like to see one come in? The goalkeeper you're not going to see till next season, albeit it's a good sign for the future. And Chiesa, does he improve things vastly? No. Maybe you're looking at a 5, maybe a 6. And then Everton, I think that they've actually, considering the PSR problems and the financial issues of the club, they've done quite well in the transfer market. The signings that they've brought in, just about when Sean Dyche really unleashes them now, because not a lot of them have Premier League experience, and they've sold quite well as well, Everton. So I'll say so far a 7.5. Could be different by tonight, but yeah, I think in the circumstances they've done well, Everton, in the window.
Yeah, I think certainly given their constraints, it's been perhaps the best they could have done in the situation they're in. Charlie, then, I know you've got 4 clubs compared to the other lads just having 2, but if you go through each one of them.
Yeah, it might be tricky to go through all of them, but for the main ones in the Premier League, Aston Villa, it's been a bit of a mixed window. I'll probably give them a 7 out of 10 because I think Amadou Onana is a terrific signing. I think he's going to be a very key player for them for many years going forward. Yes, it's £50 million. It's a lot of money, but I think they'll reap the rewards of him despite the fee. Ian Maatsen, we're yet to see much of him in a Villa shirt, but he's another one who's got the potential to sort them out on that left-hand side for many years to come. It's not like it's just a signing for the next couple of years. He's still young and he's got lots of potential to fulfill. £37 million for him is a lot of money once again, but someone who's got a lot of potential. I think with the sales of Moussa Diaby and Douglas Luiz, it does weaken them. They managed to get a lot of money for those two players and they were kind of forced into it because of PSR, but because their squad has probably not got any stronger in this window. You can't give them really anything higher than a 7, I don't think. For Wolves, they've sold well. To get 52 million for Pedro Neto is pretty impressive considering his injury record. Never played more than 15 or 20 games in the season in the Premier League for Wolves. And then Max Kilman, £40 million to West Ham. I mean, he's a decent centre-back, but 40 million is a lot of money for him. I think most Wolves fans would have taken 30 for him. So to get 40 is very impressive. But they've not been able to spend their money again. The financial restrictions and not getting a centre-back replacement is really poor from them. So I'd probably give them a 7 based on the fact they've got all that income. Birmingham, I'm not going to list all their signings, but 15 all in all. Ridiculous window for them. If they get Jay Stansfield as well, my word, that would really make it a 10 out of 10. It pretty much is already a 10 out of 10 already because they should be walking League One of that squad. But they've had so much money to spend that you wouldn't really think anything otherwise. And then West Brom, it's been a bit of a tougher window for them, losing Yokuzlu, losing Cedric Kipre as well, 2 very key players. Connor Townsend went to Ipswich. They've replaced them fairly well. They've brought in some Premier League faces, but they've not been able to spend much money either. So probably another 7 for West Brom.
Very interesting, yes. Now, just before we do end, I think the theme that I've gained from this is PSR. I'll be honest, you've all mentioned it at some stage or another. The final question to you all is, I know obviously we perhaps hype up deadline day to be more than it is, and we've always done this in this industry. But having said that, this window has seen Premier League and Championship clubs spend, not astronomically less, but certainly less. Do you think these rules are having an impact on what we're seeing in terms of incomings, outgoings of various clubs? Any of you can answer, by the way.
I mean, yeah, they definitely are, but I don't think we should necessarily see that as a bad thing. I think that clubs spending within their means should be viewed as a good thing. And I think if you were speaking to clubs on the continent in France, Spain, Germany, the thought that the Premier League are having their wings clipped in terms of spending, I don't think they would see that as a negative because the Premier League vastly outspends clubs across the continent. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think we are seeing more and more gone are the days of the big high-profile transfers for 27 to 30-year-olds. I mean, I mentioned João Cancelo earlier. No club in Europe could stump up the money to get him, and Saudi Arabia was the obvious option for him in the end. So I think he probably is indicative of where the market's at, really, in terms of big high-profile transfers. They're just becoming more and more difficult, I think, to conclude.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the interesting one now is Chelsea. What's going to come of it? I mean, I'm sure a lot of clubs are scratching their head thinking how they're getting away with spending all this money and the sort of maybe allegedly circumventing rules, etc., with hotel sales and things. Maybe might catch up with them with UEFA, reports suggest, but look, I think that needs to be looked at because they've been spending money like it's going out of fashion, haven't they? And I know they've sold players, to be fair, Kazimi graduates, which obviously looks good for PSR, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
Yeah, that David Washington deal today to Strasbourg for €8 million more than they paid for him, considering he played 30 minutes last year. It's a club also owned by Chelsea's owners, so that kind of tells you everything, doesn't it? I think that these rules, they do need to be in place because otherwise the spending in the big clubs would be even more out of control than it already is. If anything, as Michael says, they probably need to be clamped down a little bit more. But the manner in which they're with the points deductions for the likes of Everton and Nottingham Forest and the smaller clubs seem to be the ones being punished more than those at the top. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Manchester City and the gazillion charges that they've been dealt. Before that happens, I don't think we can really make much more comment on the bigger clubs.
Yep, no, I think you've also summarised it very well there. Well, thank you all for joining me on this deadline day stream. I'll be back in about half an hour on our North East and Yorkshire channels. Of course, this has gone out on the Birmingham, Liverpool and Manchester ones. But until then, I'll see you all very soon to talk Newcastle and Leeds. But thank you very much to Manchester World's Michael, to Liverpool World's Will, and to Birmingham World's Charlie. But until then, we'll see you all very soon.